ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing, your afternoon fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. I'm Arlene Foster and here's what's coming up over the next hour. Coming up today, why are the French threatened to effectively part blockade UK trade by slowing down our lorries unless we hand over more fishing licences? I'll speak to one campaigner in France who thinks the EU is to blame. Also today, China is accused of genocide against its Muslim population and is aggressively asserting control over international waters. I'll speak to the former Tory leader, Ian Duncan-Smith, who is in Rome with hundreds of other international parliamentarians to demand world leaders at the G20 summit take a tougher stance on China. And lastly, in the show today, we'll speak to an 11-year-old member of the UK's Youth Parliament, which meets online for the first time this afternoon. How are young people getting involved in politics in the age of COVID? Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. This is your news at 3 o'clock. The UK hasn't ruled out military involvement in the ongoing dispute with France over post-Brexit fishing rights. French authorities are yet to release a British scallop vessel that was detained for not having a licence. French prosecutors say the boat's captain will be called to court next August. The Environment Secretary George Eustace told GB News Navy vessels will be used if needed.
We want to try to resolve this dispute by getting France to understand and accept that those 55 vessels that haven't been granted a licence, probably aren't entitled to one. And if they're able to offer us the evidence that supports the applications, well, we'd process them. But for now, we're trying to de-escalate this, but we're also very clear that if France carries out the threats that they've made, then we will obviously make a proportionate response.
The US president has held what's been described as an unusually long meeting with Pope Francis at the Vatican. Vatican officials said the private meeting, which addressed the pandemic, climate change and poverty, lasted an hour and 15 minutes. Joe Biden, who's in Europe for the G20 summit, as well as COP26 in Glasgow, has left a fraught domestic agenda in limbo back at home. It's after his fellow Democrats abandoned plans to vote for the president's nearly $3 trillion spending plan. The Scottish Government's providing £41 million to help families with their winter bills. The cash will be made available for those on low incomes who are struggling to pay for energy. It also helps those at risk of homelessness. £6 million from the pot will go to charities that work with families in need. Coronavirus restrictions in Wales will be strengthened in a bid to curb infections, which are the highest in the UK. First Minister Mark Drakeford is reintroducing some measures, including guidance around self-isolation. Adults and young people aged 5 to 17 will soon be asked to isolate until they receive a negative PCR test. That's if someone in their household has symptoms or tests positive. COVID passes will also be extended to theatres, cinemas and concert halls. Essex police have arrested 10 people after Insulate Britain protesters gathered on the M25. The eco group confirmed they'd attempted to block the road between junctions 28 and 29. Officers say both carriageways reopened within 30 minutes. It comes after an injunction was put in place by the High Court banning the group from obstructing traffic. MPs are warning the Crossrail project is facing an £150 million funding gap. The Commons Public Accounts Committee expressed doubts over how and when taxpayer loans will be repaid. That's after the collapse in fares revenue due to the coronavirus pandemic. It's predicted the cost of finishing the projects now at £18.9 billion. West Yorkshire police are searching for a pair of missing marsupials who are believed to have been kept as pets at a home in Leeds. The male and female wallabies, called Roxy and Amadeus, have gone missing from an address in the north of the city. Police are warning people not to get too close to the animals, but instead to trap them and then call 101. The Mayor of London has received his booster COVID vaccination and winter flu jab. Sadiq Khan was given the double jabs at Pearl Chemist and Tooting. He's hoping he will encourage Londoners to get vaccinated ahead of the winter. Speaking afterwards, Mayor Khan thanked the Health Secretary for the continued rollout of free vaccinations. He also said that if he can get double jabbed, anyone can.
Well, I want to make sure everyone notes I was a very brave boy. If I didn't grimace, then anybody can do it. If I can take it, anybody can do it. And I took both jabs, the flu jab and the COVID vaccine, and I'm a wimp. So if I can do it, so can you.
And Boris Johnson has lent his support to the Royal British Legion's centenary appeal ahead of its 100th year, raising funds for veterans. The Prime Minister bought a poppy on the steps of 10 Downing Street today before urging everyone to buy a remembrance symbol. Founded in 1921, the Poppy Appeal also raises funds for serving personnel and their families. I'll be back with the latest headlines in half an hour. Now let's return to the briefing with Arlene Foster.
And welcome back to the briefing. First up today, as we heard in the bulletin, coronavirus restrictions in Wales will be strengthened in a bid to curb infections, which are the highest in the UK, the First Minister said today. London's Mayor, Sadiq Khan, was quick to follow with a statement urging the UK government to ramp up restrictions across the whole of the United Kingdom, including mandatory masks on public transport. And any moment now, we're expecting Scotland's First Minister to make an announcement on COVID ahead of COP26. However, UK-wide COVID infection rates have actually fallen for the past week, and we are yet to see if death rates will rise accordingly. They have risen slightly in Northern Ireland, and I will always urge people to follow the scientific and medical advice. However, we must also consider the economy and the impact the economy has. Not having a job is very important. So some businesses are now questioning the prospect of another winter of lockdown restrictions, which in Wales at least seem to single out our hospitality and leisure industries. So before we hear from them, let's see what the Welsh Government had to say.
We want to keep Wales safe and to keep Wales open. To do that, we need to strengthen the measures we currently have in place to prevent coronavirus spreading even further and more people falling seriously ill. That will need everybody's help to reduce the spread of the virus over the next 3 weeks. When rates are as high as they are in Wales today, everything we do has an impact on the virus and every contact we have counts. I must be clear. If rates continue to rise rather than fall, the Cabinet will have to consider raising the alert level. Over the coming 3 weeks, we will strengthen 6 measures, from the requirement to wear face coverings to changing the guidance on self-isolation. We're changing that guidance, the self-isolation guidance, to reflect the latest evidence about household transmission. You are more likely to catch coronavirus if you are living with someone who already has it. Over the next 3 weeks, we will also extend the COVID pass. We've made COVID passes compulsory in nightclubs and in larger indoor and outdoor events just a fortnight ago, and the implementation so far has gone very successfully. While cases are so high, we will extend their use to theatres, cinemas and concert halls in 2 weeks' time.
So GB News today approached the Welsh Government for a comment regarding the new restrictions, but as of yet, they have not provided us with any. And so I'm now pleased to welcome to discuss these new restrictions Phil Clapp, who's the Chief Executive of the UK Cinema Association. Phil, you're very welcome to the programme. I know that you have put out a statement in relation to these restrictions that have been announced, and perhaps you could share your views with the GB News audience today.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I think our members across Wales, large and small, are slightly dismayed by the fact that cinemas have been singled out for increased restrictions. There is no evidence, and the Welsh Government have provided no evidence at all, that cinemas or indeed theatres are particular areas of risk of transmission. The Welsh Government's own figures say that households and hospitality are the biggest risks of transmission. And while we wouldn't invite restrictions on anyone, we would say that any restrictions which do come in need to be evidence-led. And cinemas are just getting back on their feet after the last 18 months. But all we've seen from similar restrictions in other European territories is this has a massive impact on attendances and people's willingness to attend cinemas. And it sends a very negative signal about the safety of cinemas, which is contrary to all the evidence we have of how safe the environment that cinemas offer is.
And if the First Minister was here, I'm sure he would say that he is doing this to deal with the fact that Wales has a very high rate at the moment of infections, and he's just being prudent and cautious. I suppose your point is that he needs to provide the evidence as to why it's cinemas that he's targeting as opposed to family contact in the homes.
I would say that. I mean, no sector, I would argue, has worked harder than cinemas to provide a safe environment. And we're still in a place where we're not aware of any case of COVID being traced back to a cinema in Wales or across the whole of the UK. So, while we understand and we want to do our bit, that needs to be proportionate, and it needs to understand the economic impacts, as you said earlier, of these type of measures. All we've seen in other territories, as I say, is the impact of these measures, regardless almost of the rationale, is a massive economic hit. And at a time when the Welsh Government has decided not to impose similar measures on pubs and restaurants, I think it's very simple to see a scenario whereby most people, and cinema going is a spontaneous activity, not a majority of people plan for it. People will decide to go to a pub and a restaurant, which seem to be more high-risk environments, than to go to the cinema.
And of course, this isn't the only pressure that cinemas and cinema owners are facing. They have all of the online pressures and Netflix and what have you to deal with as well. Isn't it the case that the cinemas are really struggling at this present moment in time?
Well, thankfully not. I mean, certainly what we've seen over the last month or so with the arrival of the new James Bond film, which is just touching £80 million at box office this week, is a great pent-up demand of people to get back out there and to enjoy the big screen experience. But that's not to say that challenges don't remain. That's not to say that we don't have a long way to go to make up for what we've lost over the last 18 months or so. And these kind of what we would say were unnecessary barriers put in the place of customers returning are clearly not going to help that effort.
And I suppose as well, the experience of going to the cinema is one that we all enjoy. And I think it's absolutely right to point out that the new James Bond movie certainly does seem to have drawn people back into the cinemas again. But it is, I suppose, what is it that the cinema industry can do to enhance that experiential time when people go to the cinemas? Obviously, I'm taking you a little bit away from the COVID restrictions, but I'm just interested to hear what you think could be done by the industry themselves if they didn't have these restrictions.
So the trend we saw before COVID was one of investment in the broader environment. So not just the sound, not just the vision, but sofas and the higher end food and drink offers. And I think one of the impacts of COVID, where we recognise we need to, do more to encourage people back off their sofas, is further and greater investment in that. And certainly all I'm seeing and hearing from our members, who range from the largest to the smallest cinema operators across the UK, is a desire and a willingness to invest. But measures such as that announced today in Wales by the Welsh Government make that investment much more difficult. There'll be less revenue coming in, and there'll be more of a demand for staff just to police these kind of measures. So none of these things help at a time when we would argue that governments of all colours and in all UK nations should be seeking to support the industry in getting back to some semblance of normality which cinema provides.
Just to finish, Phil, of course, you have pointed out that this is something that isn't happening in other parts of the UK, but across Europe, the vaccine passports have been introduced in France and places like Greece. Isn't this something that we're going to have to just get used to?
Well, we would say not. We don't see much evidence at all of the COVID passports with regard to cinemas having any impact on rates of transmission. And that's because we would say, and I think all the evidence suggests, that cinemas are safe places. What we do know is it has a negative impact on admissions. And I would say probably the best practice when it comes to the imposition of COVID passports is to use them as a time-limited measure. And I guess another worry that we have around the way that this has been handled by the Welsh government is there's no sense of a timetable. There's no sense of how long these measures might be in place. You know, the argument might be if the risk is as great as it might be, then why are we waiting 2 weeks for this? None of this really seems to stack up and doesn't seem to align with the evidence.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for coming on and being so clear in relation to the issues that you see ahead for the cinema industry in Wales and indeed across the UK. Thanks very much for coming on this afternoon.
Thank you.
OK, so we're going to move on to our next story. And Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has said on Wednesday that his budget gives an extra £1.6 billion per year for public services in Northern Ireland. He claimed the allocation represented the largest annual funding settlement for devolved governments right across the UK since 1998. But how true is this? Northern Irish politicians of different backgrounds have disputed the claim. Conor Murphy, the Sinn Féin Finance Minister, said it was nowhere near what is required. And I'm very pleased to be joined this afternoon by the MP for East Antrim and former Northern Ireland Finance Minister, Sammy Wilson, who I'm sure will have a view on all of that. Sammy, we've got a lot to cover in a short time, but I did want to, of course, ask you for your reaction to the budget in general, but particularly in relation to Northern Ireland.
Well, first of all, the Chancellor's had a very difficult job. He's now got to try and get the finances of the United Kingdom back on track after the financial splurge that there was to deal with COVID and the way in which the government hurt the economy as a result of the way in which it decided to handle the COVID crisis. But as far as Northern Ireland is concerned, of course, we do rely very heavily on the money which is allocated from the budget in Westminster because we have very few revenue-raising powers. I'm not so sure I want to see any more revenue-raising powers for Northern Ireland either, but we rely on the block grant. And it's not as generous as what the Chancellor has said. Public spending in the United Kingdom as a whole will go by 3.8% in real terms over the life of this Parliament. The figures that the Chancellor gave on Wednesday show that there'll be a 1.3% increase in Northern Ireland. So really, we get a third of the real increase in spending that is going to apply across the rest of the United Kingdom. And I think that will cause some pressure on the budget storm. Nevertheless, the Finance Minister does have a job, and I know from the difficulties we had in the past, has a job to ensure that public services are provided for as best they can.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've seen the Office for Budget Responsibility made some predictions in relation to the damage, is the word I think they used, that Brexit and COVID had both had on the economy of the UK. I mean, what do you make of their analysis that I think it was 4% extra on the economy because of COVID and another 4% because of Brexit? What's your take on all of that?
Well, I mean, first of all, we know that the Northern Ireland Protocol has cost the Northern Ireland economy about £850 million so far because of the disadvantage which it places the Northern Ireland economy in due to restrictions in goods being able to come to Northern Ireland, the extra costs involved in bringing goods to Northern Ireland and the cost which that puts on manufacturers, as well as the fact that some suppliers are not even supplying to Northern Ireland any longer. So there is an issue there which the government needs to address. And of course, the government has a general levelling up agenda. And one would have expected that the levelling up agenda, knowing that Northern Ireland is already at a disadvantage because of the protocol, because of our geographical position, and because of historical situations where we had huge amounts of expenditure dealing with the terrorist campaign and little spent on infrastructure during that time. A lot of levelling up to be done, yet it seems to be that the allocation in the budget is the reverse of that, where Northern Ireland is getting actually a lesser percentage than the general uplift in budgets for departments right across the United Kingdom.
And in terms of the protocol, which you've mentioned, Sammy, I know that there's been a lot of commentary here in London about the changes in the VAT rules around alcohol. But of course, there's confusion around that in Northern Ireland because of the fact of the protocol, isn't that right? I mean, we don't have the clarity that others have in relation to the VAT rules.
I did raise that point in the budget debate on Wednesday, and I'm waiting a response from the Chancellor. Now, I've been assured by some Conservatives who got a briefing from the Chancellor that there will be no issue as far as the changes in VAT and excise duty are concerned with Northern Ireland. But that remains to be seen. In the past, we were told, of course, that the checks would be very minimal and would have little impact in Northern Ireland, that there would be no fiscal impact on VAT, and we know that from the second-hand car industry and a number of other industries, steel and others, that was not true. So sometimes the Treasury, I think, don't even understand the impact of the Northern Ireland Protocol, and it's only when they start to apply measures they then find that because of the protocol and because of the insistence by the EU that we abide by EU rules, even though we're part of the United Kingdom, that there are unforeseen consequences which then have to be dealt with. And the government is had to introduce, and you will know this, Arlene, had to introduce special measures to deal with the steel industry, because the steel industry in Northern Ireland was going to be, or the purchase of steel in Northern Ireland was going to be very, very difficult and very expensive because of the protocol. And it remains to be seen whether the alcohol duties and the changes in alcohol duties will be able to apply fully to Northern Ireland.
I'm afraid we're losing signal and the quality's not so good, and I apologise for that. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, but I'm sure we'll come back again to these issues again. So after the break, the Labour Leader of Parliament, powerful Public Accounts Committee, tells me why she thinks Crossrail is more than £100 million over budget. Before that, let's take a look at the weather.
We have further weather warnings in force right the way through the weekend and into the start of next week. More heavy rain in the forecast on top of the already saturated ground from the last few days. And the reason things are quite so unsettled, a big area of low pressure in the Atlantic sweeping various weather fronts right the way across the country. And there's more of that to come. In fact, the next one already waiting in the wings. This will bring another band of rain our way, heading in from the west through the course of this evening and overnight. And again, there will be some very heavy downpours associated with that band of rain. Either side, there will be some drier conditions, but with quite a lot of cloud associated with that band of rain, it won't be a particularly cold night for most of us. So Saturday starts on a wet note across western parts of the UK, and that band of rain will continue to trundle its way eastwards. It is actually moving slightly more quickly than some of the previous weather fronts have over the last few days, which is good news. And there are better conditions following on behind. So through Saturday afternoon and into the evening, drier conditions arrive from the west. Always the chance of a blustery shower, but some drier spells in between. And that's the case as we move through Saturday night. A lot of dry weather around, a few showers popping up here and there, especially across western parts of the country. And then yet another band of rain starts to edge in from the Atlantic. And this one will be with us first thing on Sunday morning. So it's a repeat performance for Sunday. Again, a wet start to the day for many of us, especially across western parts of the country. That rain, again, with some heavy downpours associated with it, gradually begins to track its way east and northwards, with some clearer conditions following on behind, which is good news if you're heading out trick-or-treating. Dry weather for some of us, but it remains unsettled into next week.
Hi, I'm Alistair Stewart, and I really hope that you can join me here on GB News. I've been in this game for 40 years and I've made lots of friends, and I try and reflect what they think about the big stories of the day in conversation with me. That's why we call it Alistair Stewart and Friends, and you're a key part of it as well. I always get inundated with emails and messages and texts, and if they're really good, I play them back to you. 12 till 3 every Saturday and Sunday.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, 4 to the point.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me live from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Your weekend starts here. My show exists to do three things: to inform, to debate and to entertain. Big guests, big stories and big opinions. And I can't do any of it without you. It's lively and it's a little bit funny. So join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Welcome back. Next up, I'll be speaking to the Labour Chair of the Public Accounts Committee. They have a report out today claiming that COVID-19 pandemic has added an extra £234 million to the cost of Crossrail, also known as the Elizabeth Line, which connects East and West London. Now, Crossrail is one of Europe's largest infrastructure projects, and it was approved in 2007. Construction began in 2009, and it was supposed to be open more than 3 years ago, with the date being moved back multiple times. Joining me now is Dame Meg Hillier, Chair of the committee behind the report and Labour MP for Hackney South and Shoreditch. Meg, you've had a very busy week, 2 major reports out and a budget to analyse, but I think we want to talk today primarily about Crossrail. Perhaps you could give us your views on the report that came out today.
Well, as you say, Arlene, it's been dogged with delay and cost increases all the way through. And the reason for that delay originally was because all the bits of engineering were put together, but no one had really worked through how you integrate that. This is a problem we see in a lot of rail projects. And we've now had a pledge from the Transport Commissioner in London that it will open between the central section, that's the inner London, the middle London section, between February and June of next year. But there is still, when we saw them last, a gap of £150 million to plug. He tells us he's hoping to manage that down, but it's unlikely to manage down to zero unless he's a miracle worker. So there's still a gap of funding that needs to be resolved.
So back in 2010, the cost was assessed to be around £15 billion, 14.8 billion, I think, and now it's gone up to nearly £19 billion. This seems to be a recurring problem with some of our big infrastructure projects. It is about delivery, Meg, if I may say so. And Certainly that's the case in Northern Ireland as well, where we seem to have a problem on actually delivering it on the ground on time and on budget as well. Is it a problem you're seeing right across the piece?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, particularly with rail projects, there's a big issue there. That's because you've got lots of moving parts, and sometimes we feel passengers are left at the end. And that integration with all that complicated software that's now involved in these big projects for rail is part of it. But as you rightly highlight, whether with every nation of the UK, we've seen these problems. And sometimes there's lots of reasons for this. Optimism bias, where everyone says it's going to be fine. And there's, as much as anyone, that can be political optimism that says we must get this delivered. And all the officials tell you it's all going to be fine because they don't want to say no to an important politician. But actually, we need much more honesty about how we plan these public programmes and build in delay. We had a very firm deadline for the Elizabeth line, scheduled a particular date. And we now say as a committee, much better if you say it's this period of months that we're aiming for, because very often one small thing can delay something by a few weeks, if not a few months, quite easily. And that would be a much more realistic and honest approach to dealing with these big projects.
And I think that the delivery unit seems to be back in vogue again in Downing Street. Is that something that you would welcome in terms of infrastructure projects, to have more of a focus on getting them delivered on time and on budget?
Well, yes, absolutely. But it is a bit of a shame, really, that it feels like you have to have a number 10 delivery unit. I know you've been in the position where I'm sure you want to have control over things from the centre. But actually what we need to do, and what we say as a committee repeatedly, is that every government department, every bit of Whitehall needs to be good at this delivery. We need people in Whitehall who aren't just clever people, but people who actually know how to deliver a major project. And I think actually, to be fair, in the Transport Commissioner, the new commissioner we've got in London now, he really is banging heads together. He was very positive, owned the project, didn't try to pretend it wasn't his problem, and was very confident that we would see the central section opening between February and June. We still felt things could go wrong, but he was very positive that that would be delivered. So the proof will be if we get to June next year and we have seen that central section reopen, but we've still got this problem of the money. Although compared with some of the money that I've been looking at this week, like 37 billion for test and trace, it's smaller, but it is still taxpayers' money, and every pound of taxpayers' money should be spent wisely, of course.
Absolutely. And I obviously want to hear your view on the budget as well, which we had this week, and seemed to have got a warm welcome at the start, but as is normal in these cases, once we get into the detail, we see perhaps a different story. Can you give me your take on the budget this week?
Well, yeah, it is a bit of a smoke and mirrors budget, as is very often the case. And of course, my committee and my very excellent committee members are crawling through these numbers all the time. So we can quickly see some of the promises that sound like they're new money, but it's a re-announcement of old money and that sort of thing. So, for example, in British schools, or English schools anyway, because education is obviously devolved in other parts of the UK, we see a promise of more money going in. And there's a lot of talk about more cash than ever before in the last 10 years, but it's still not got anywhere near back to 2010 levels. And we're also seeing a government promise to pay all teachers £30,000 a year, not yet delivered. But if they deliver that promise, there's not enough money to pay for that, with the settlement that's got to cover other things as well. So if you start looking at not much detail, actually, frankly, Arlene, you can just look at some of the headlines. And if you know a bit about the subject, you realise that some of these are very flimsy promises. And then, of course, there's this whole debate about levelling up. And the Red Book has lots of mentions of outside London. And, we have to be clear that levelling up should be in every part. Every corner of the UK has poverty and challenge. And every corner of the UK has some area that's doing less well than another, or some people that are doing less well than another. And that levelling up, needs to be across the whole of the UK, not just pitting one part of the UK against another. And I think that's, we still, of course, have no definition of what levelling up means. So we're still waiting for that.
Well, Meg, thank you very much for coming on. I'd love to have longer to speak to you, because we saw some analysis from the Institute of Fiscal Studies today saying there seemed to be a huge increase in the money going to the NHS. But as you rightly say, education seems to be a different story. But perhaps we'll get back to that. Again, thank you so much for coming on.
Happy to come back.
Thank you very much. So the leaders of the world's 20 biggest economies are gathering in Rome. And so we're going to go now to a break.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. Here are the latest headlines. The UK hasn't ruled out military involvement in the ongoing dispute with France over post-Brexit fishing rights. French authorities are yet to release a British scallop vessel detained yesterday for not having a licence. Prosecutors say the boat's captain has been summoned to appear in court next August. US President Joe Biden has met Pope Francis at the Vatican. During talks that lasted more than an hour, they discussed the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change and poverty. President Biden will head to the G20 summit in Rome this weekend before travelling to Glasgow for COP26. A serving Met police officer has been charged with child sex offences. 51-year-old Detective Constable Francois Allwood was arrested at an address in Basingstoke. He's facing 4 charges, including attempting to meet a girl under 16 years of age. The Scottish Government's providing £41 million to help families with their winter bills. The cash will be made available for those on low incomes who are struggling to pay for energy. It'll also help those at risk of homelessness. The Prime Minister has lent his support to the Royal British Legion's centenary appeal ahead of its 100th year, raising funds for veterans. Boris Johnson bought a poppy on the steps of 10 Downing Street before urging everyone to buy a remembrance symbol. We'll have a full update for you at the top of the hour. See you then.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
So as I was saying before the break, the leaders of the world's 20 biggest economies are gathering in Rome today for a G20 summit before heading to Glasgow, Scotland for the UN Climate Conference. That's lots of jet setting in 1 week for an international elite which wants you to cut back on your flying. COVID-19, the economic recovery and climate change are the main issues being discussed in Rome. However, representatives from the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, a body of some 200 global parliamentarians, are also gathering in Rome. They are there to stage a counter-meeting ahead of the G20 Leaders Summit to demand a tougher stance towards China. And joining me now from Rome is Ian Duncan-Smith, former leader of the Conservative Party. Ian, you're very welcome to the show. And perhaps
Hello, Arlene.
Explain to our viewers what you're doing in Rome today.
Well, we formed the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, IPAC, a year ago, and the purpose of IPAC was to bring together as many nations as possible and politicians on the left and on the right together, so non-partisan, to draw attention to all those countries that are believers in democracy, freedom, human rights, to say to them there is a real problem, a real threat, a growing menace from China who is disregarding all the normal rules that we all govern ourselves by, trade rules, financial rules. And then on top of that, there's the Uyghur genocide, Tibetans, persecution of the Christians in the Falun Gong, the trashing of the Hong Kong Treaty with the UK, and the arrest of peaceful protesters, the occupation of the South China Seas, the death of those Indian soldiers, and finally, of course, the major threats now to Taiwan, where they've said that they will, as necessary, invade Taiwan. So all of this is destabilizing. And as your interview, you mentioned that 20 of the largest nations, well, they're not here. The Chinese president will not be coming to this. And the reality about the Chinese president is that he's also not going to COP26. So any great hope where they said, oh, let's be quiet, let's be nice to the Chinese government, the CCP, because, they'll cooperate. They're not cooperating even on climate change. And so we need to think about, how we readjust our finance, our investments, and we look elsewhere, and we make sure that China is unable to threaten other nations. And so that's what IPAC is about, as I say, well over 200 members now from all over the world, and India has joined today as well. So that's really important.
I think that's quite significant, the fact that India has joined with you, Ian, as well. And you've mentioned the whole range of issues there. I mean, are you concerned about the fact that China does seem to be on a more isolationist approach to its engagement with the rest of the world?
Well, actually, yes, but also on the same point that many in the rest of the world have followed what I consider to be a kind of project kowtow, which is that you sort of bend and prostrate yourself in front of China in the hope that China will change their ways. And IPAC has been making this point for some time, that in actual fact, you can't carry on like that, because they just take that and carry on and do what they want to do. We've also been having a photo shoot here because many of us, myself included, are now sanctioned by the Chinese government. So, there are really countries that will, if necessary, arrest us and arrange us to be sent to China. So we have been making it very clear that people should resist that, and government should not cooperate with the Chinese government. And many of them are doing so. So there are lots of issues, but the key thing is we have to recognize, as we've learned in the 1930s, and we've learned again during the Cold War, you have to, in a way, confront dictators like this, intolerant regimes, with their behavior, and not keep giving them more and more that they ask for or demand in the hope that they'll change their ways. China is clearly not going to do that. And therefore, we need to be able to say, well, if you're not going to do that, then we need to rethink the nature of our investments and our involvement with China. And this idea of just hoping for the best when recognizing there are serious problems in their behavior is complete nonsense. And far too many governments in the free world have followed that policy, and it's clearly failing.
And I mean, obviously, you welcome the recent statement by your colleague, the Foreign Secretary, in relation to investment from China. But I also wonder, given what you said about governments kowtowing to China, does that include a cover-up over COVID?
Well, this is one of the big questions, of course, which is really the public has reached a conclusion which is well ahead of their governments, I think, in many of our countries. COVID was and has been and still around is a devastating pandemic that has ripped the world apart. We've lost tens of millions of people have died and been suffer long disease and illness as a result. And this all started in China, and we want to know and get to the bottom of how did it start. What we saw was the real problem with what you have when you have a kind of rogue government that doesn't obey the rules, doesn't cooperate, for example, in the WHO. Instead of doing what they were meant to do, which should have reported almost immediately they have a virus which is not known in the sense of how to deal with it, they should have reported that straight away to the WHO. They delayed certainly at least a month, probably more, by which time this local disease, and then became an epidemic in China, had escaped out into the rest of the world, and the rest, as we know and say, is history. So millions have died. We've asked that question. We want a proper independent review of what happened. Of course, what we find now is the Chinese government has spent the last intervening time shutting down that laboratory in Wuhan and clearing all the known data from it. So when the WHO went out on one, I have to say, a rather pathetic visit in which they simply did what the Chinese wanted and got nothing as a result. Now more and more people are convinced that there is a real problem that we need to get to the bottom of. And had we got to the bottom of it earlier, who knows how many people could have been saved if there had been a month earlier in their public utterances.
And I think, Ian, you know, the WHO has to answer questions as well. But what do you hope to achieve in Rome by being there today whilst the G20 is having their meeting?
Well, we're saying to the G20, the elephant in the room in all of this, whether it's climate change, whether it's intolerant behavior, it's genocide, whether it's threats to other neighbor countries like Taiwan or India, or taking over illegally the South China Seas and militarizing them. The elephant in the room on every single one of these discussions and the problems we have over post-COVID all come back to the same place, which is Beijing and the CCP. And therefore, you know, you cannot have a G20 without this being a serious issue to discuss. And failure to do it shows weakness. And that weakness will be interpreted by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, as a green light to get on and do what they want. The overflying of Taiwan, the threats on Taiwan at the moment are
Ian, we're going to move on because I really do want to take your view on this issue before you leave, and that's around the fact that when you were Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, you fought to get the government to make changes to universal credit, and finally we've seen in the budget this week that the tapering that you were looking for was there. What have you got to say about that? You must be delighted that that has happened.
Well, I'm delighted at last. That was when I came in 2010. I really came in for one purpose, was to reform the welfare system, to make it simpler, to bring a bunch of benefits together that most people who get unemployed at some point interact with. They were all run differently with separate rates and everything else. Bring them all together, put them in the same system, have one rate of withdrawal and a set of allowances that allow you to earn a certain amount of money depending on your condition before that money is taken away from you bit by bit. I wanted 55%. That's what we'd worked out was the best balance in terms of the taper rate. That is the money that is withdrawn from you as you are earning it as you go into full-time work. The government at the time I was part of simply didn't agree, and we ended up at 65%, which was too high. And bear in mind that if you hit taxation, that would rise to over 70%. It was still better than what was before, which were marginal rates of nearly 95% withdrawal under the old benefits. But to really incentivize people, help them on that way back into full-time work, you needed it at about 55%. And I'm really pleased that the government has decided to go for that, because that in a way is a tax cut for lower paid workers, which is very much what we should be about as a government. And I'm pleased, well, over the moon about it.
Ian, just very, very quickly now, I couldn't have you on the show and not mention fishing. What's your take on the latest fight, I think is what it's been called at the moment?
Well, I think everybody's got to get this into context. What's happened is the French president is facing an election. He's not doing very well. The normal story in France, I think, is if you have an electoral problem, the first thing you have to do is go and pull the tail of the lion across the water. That's us, because, you know, blame it all on us and then have a spat. And that's what they're doing. The second bit of this is also that they're furious about the AUKUS deal, the deal between America, the UK, and Australia, where they were about to sell, or they thought the French were about to sell some submarines, diesel submarines, and in actual fact, we've stepped in and sold them nuclear-powered submarines. They're furious about that. And finally, of course, you know, he's failed to get the EU to back him. They've said no, and he's in the wrong. This is quite illegal what he's done. And I think the British government can afford to be very strong, because, as I say, even, you know, he extols the virtues of the EU on a daily basis, only to find they don't want anything to do with this behavior. So my answer is, you did a deal. You may not like the deal. So welcome to the EU, and that's it. You're doing something that's wrong and illegal, and it's time to back it up.
As always, thank you for your thoughts on a range of issues, and all the very best in Rome. OK, well, we've just heard from Ian Duncan-Smith. They're on the fishing row, and the captain of a detained Scottish fishing boat has been summoned to a French court in this last couple of hours amid the ongoing row between the UK and France. Earlier this morning, George Eustace, the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Farming, told GBNews the UK was prepared to retaliate if France began a trade war. Here's what he had to say.
We want to try to resolve this dispute by getting France to understand and accept that those 55 vessels that haven't been granted a licence, you know, probably aren't entitled to one. And if they're able to offer us the evidence that supports the applications, well, we'd process them. But, you know, for now, we're trying to de-escalate this, but we're also very clear that if France carries out the threats that they've made, you know, then we will obviously make a proportionate response.
Scottish seafood giant Macduff Shellfish, which owns the detained vessel, has repeated today its insistence that the boat's activity was entirely legal. So what's going on? And is Brexit, the French election, or the UK authorities to blame? To talk about this, we have with us Charles-Henri Galouche, President of Generation Frexit, who joins me now. You're very welcome to the show all the way from Switzerland, as I understand it. And it's good to see you and to hear from you today. Perhaps you could give us your take on this growing diplomatic incident.
Yes, I think the French government, which is composed of many Euro fanatics such as Clément Beaune or Emmanuel Macron, is behaving like quite in an irresponsible way. Because if you look at the whole picture, actually, you see that yes, the deal is pretty bad for France, but who has negotiated the deal? It's not France itself; it's the EU. The EU has negotiated the deal for all the EU countries, including France. So the French government, which is not happy with the deal, I can understand it. They should blame the EU and Michel Barnier for the negotiation and not the UK, because basically the UK is abiding by the deal. What is bad for the French fishermen? It's the French fleet, fishermen. You have many little boats that has not, recording system. So these little boats, they cannot prove that they were fishing during the last year in the British waters. And that is the issue, and that is why they have not the license, but it was something to look at during the negotiation. And, they didn't do great negotiation, and our government, they don't want to blame the EU. You have a presidential election next year, and Macron is like the representation of EU in France, so he won't blame the EU at all. He's doing politics, blaming the UK, and he wants to show the muscle because he has this election. But eventually, the issue is on the EU deal, and I'm quite sure that if we were out the European Union, we could have a much better bilateral deal between the UK and France, because we have common interests also in fishing, as in terms of natural fishes. You know that many fishes they are born on the French coast because it's due to the water level, and then they go to the UK part. So we have common interest in the fishing part, and we could have a better deal. But the main issue is definitely the EU deal.
Charles, I suppose those of us who are in the UK are wondering what impact the challenger in the presidential election, Eric Zemmour, is having on Mr. Macron, because there are some commentators here who believe that Anglo-French relations will not improve unless and until President Macron leaves the Elysee Palace. Give me a quick answer, if you don't mind, in relation to that issue.
No, I quite agree with what you're saying, because you know that Macron is a Euro fanatic, and Macron he is afraid, of Brexit, because he's afraid that the UK will go well after Brexit, and that it will give some idea to other countries across Europe to leave the European Union, which is a nightmare for him. So I think until Macron is in power, you won't have a better relationship between the UK and France. Then I think, and if we have another president next year, I'm quite sure that the relationship will be much better, because we have many common interests in terms of armies,
Charles,
in terms of
we're going to have to
fishing,
leave
in
it
terms
there.
of...
And thank you so much for coming on, and no doubt we'll speak again in relation to this story. And our final story this afternoon, one close to my heart, is that children from all of the UK's 650 parliamentary constituency will this afternoon, take place in a parliamentary-style debate which aims to get young people involved in politics. The children aged 7 to 11 will gather online for the Children's Parliament, where top of the agenda will be issues concerning the environment, of course, ahead of COP26. And initially, the event was going to be chaired by the late Sir David Amess. However, David MP, for the former Brexit Secretary, is now taking his place after David's tragic murder. And the Prime Minister has recorded an opening message. Well, I'm really pleased to be joined by two very special guests, Peter Spencer-Lane, who is a head teacher, and Lola Hill, the member of the Youth Parliament. welcome both to the show. It's really good to have you here with us. And Lola, we'll start with you. Are you really looking forward to this afternoon, and what issue are you going to bring to the Youth Parliament?
I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm bringing up the issue of COVID-19, and I'm saying a few words about that.
Absolutely brilliant. And of course, Southend will be a city now, and you're from Southend, aren't you? So that's a really excellent thing to talk about as well. And can I speak to the head teacher beside you there? And I'm going to ask him about the idea of the Parliament, and why do you think it's so important for young people to be interested in politics in what is a social media online age?
Well, I mean, it's quite simple, really, because these young people are the people who are going to actually live the results of the COP26 conference. You know, they're the people who will be running the country by the time we reach our targets of net zero emissions. So it means more to them than to anybody else. So when we fashioned this Parliament, we really wanted people to hear the children's voice. They know what they're talking about. To them, climate change is a hugely passionate issue. And I think it's really worth the COP26 delegates hearing what our children have to say.
Lola, you must be very excited to hear that the Prime Minister is going to be opening the Parliament this afternoon. That is something that we just learned about earlier on today. And the fact that you and others right across the UK have a voice today, and we've heard that it's a very important voice. I remember when I was your age, and I certainly wasn't talking about climate change, so it's wonderful to hear young people like you having that conversation. What specifically do you want to see changing in the world?
Probably the climate change, with all the pollution in the world, and all of the polar bears and like all the icebergs getting melted and in effect by the weather. Probably all of that.
Very good. And you're looking forward to seeing all your other colleagues that are going to be there as well, telling us what's happening in the rest of the UK. I think it's a huge opportunity for you, and I hope it all goes well today online. I know you'd rather be in the chamber, and we'd rather it was the case as well, but I think the fact that it's happening online is wonderful. And of course, if I can go back to you, head teacher, this is tinged with sadness today because of Sir David Amess not being able to be there. I'm sure you'd like to pay tribute to the work that he did behind the scenes.
Yeah, I'm the Speaker of the House for the event, and Sir David was due to be sat next to me. And it's really, really sad for everybody that he's not going to be there. But I think the event is a good memorial to him, because he is the one who put the energy behind it. You know, we came to him with our little idea, and he ran with it to Parliament. He ran with it through the country, and now our little idea has gone nationwide, all because Sir David energised it. And he's always been a good friend of the school. He came to the school regularly. We all know him. I know Lola's met him a number of times, and we all miss him. So it'll be really good to have this event, which I know was very close to his heart.
So Peter and Lola, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, and I hope you have a wonderful Parliament this evening. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster. The show is back every weekday from 12 p.m. Up next, it's Nana Akuya, but for now, I'll leave you with your weather forecast.
We have further weather warnings in force right the way through the weekend and into the start of next week. More heavy rain in the forecast on top of the already saturated ground from the last few days. And the reason things are quite so unsettled, a big area of low pressure in the Atlantic sweeping various weather fronts right the way across the country. And there's more of that to come. In fact, the next one already waiting in the wings. This will bring another band of rain our way, heading in from the west through the course of this evening and overnight. And again, there will be some very heavy downpours associated with that band of rain. Either side, there will be some drier conditions, but with quite a lot of cloud associated with that band of rain, it won't be a particularly cold night for most of us. So Saturday starts on a wet note across western parts of the UK, and that band of rain will continue to trundle its way eastwards. It is actually moving slightly more quickly than some of the previous weather fronts have over the last few days, which is good news. And there are better conditions following on behind. So through Saturday afternoon and into the evening, drier conditions arrive from the west. Always the chance of a blustery shower, but some drier spells in between. And that's the case as we move through Saturday night. A lot of dry weather around, a few showers popping up here and there, especially across western parts of the country. And then yet another band of rain starts to edge in from the Atlantic. And this one will be with us first thing on Sunday morning. So it's a repeat performance for Sunday. Again, a wet start to the day for many of us, especially across western parts of the country. That rain, again, with some heavy downpours associated with it, gradually begins to track its way east and northwards, with some clearer conditions following on behind, which is good news if you're heading out trick-or-treating. Dry weather for some of us, but it remains unsettled into next week.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.